Welcome back, everybody, to the ROI Online Podcast. And today, I'm really proud to introduce you to Josh Patrick. Now, I met Josh he reached out and talked to us, but the more I talked to him, the more I felt you guys needed to meet him. Josh is an author. He has a book called Sustainable, a fable about creating a personally and economically sustainable business. He's got a podcast as well. He's a host of a podcast called Cracking the Cash Flow Code. That's a lot of Russian sounds in that, but it has 100 episodes, so I think he knows what he's doing. He's also got a radio show called the Business Sustainability Radio Show. He's about helping you get your business what he calls sales ready. So he wants to help you get sales ready business. Josh, welcome to the ROI Online Podcast.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Josh, why don't we do this? A lot of folks that are listening, they're business owners, they're entrepreneurs, they're marketing directors, but there's a common theme, a common thing that they all wrestle with, and that's how to run a business under fire. When we're getting hit in the face with these cream pies all the time and trying to stay on track, give us a little background about why in the world you would start a business to coach people that are somewhat off and think that they can start a business and change the world.
Well, most people don't start a business to change the world, first of all. Most people start a business because they see a problem that's not being solved and they can solve it. And, Michael Gerber in the E-Myth calls that a technician having an entrepreneurial cramp. And the truth is most businesses actually start that way, and most businesses stay that way because the person starting the business is really more interested in solving that little scratch they want to itch than they are building an enterprise.
That's true.
If you look at the numbers, here's something that I think is really always interesting. I like to bring out. There's 28 million businesses in the United States. Mm-hmm. Only 6 million of those have any employees at all, and only 300,000 do more than $5 million in sales.
That's crazy.
So when you get down, the numbers get really small really fast. And the reason is, and I've talked to, hundreds, maybe 1,000 business owners over my 40 years of doing this stuff, is that they just really are more interested in doing their craft than building a business.
Yeah, those stats, Josh, I believe that the invisible heroes of our economy are these entrepreneurs that have 20 or less employees. And it's like 98.5% of the American businesses have 20 or less employees. And you think about the person running that business, they're wearing every single hat generally in that business. And
and the challenge is they don't recognize what they do well and what they do poorly. And they end up spending way too much time doing work they could hire somebody for $20 an hour. And they ignore the work that creates $5,000 an hour for them.
Totally. And that's why they need someone like you, is to help them think that through. But usually the only people that you really have to pull from are some of your employees, or maybe your spouse or your uncle. We don't have a lot of a life support, so to speak, for folks that are running businesses.
Yeah, that's pretty much true. And the other issue is the people who are good are expensive. Mm-hmm. So if you have a business that's making, $200,000 or $100,000 a year, which is probably the majority of the private businesses in this country, you're not going to go out and spend $60,000 on a consultant to come in and help you run your business, unless you are willing to make some significant changes and you want to take that $100,000 or $200,000 up to $500,000 in profits.
So what's a guy to do? What's this brave, courageous person that's got to figure out HR, got to figure out pricing, needs to negotiate. We've got to buy, and we got to get payroll done. What do you do? How do you carve out a little time? How do you find somebody? That's a significant challenge.
Yeah, the biggest challenge they have is that size business. The owner is almost always 100% involved tactically in the business, and 0% strategically working on the business.
Mm-hmm.
And what I tell people to do is say, look, if you're going to work 50 or 60 hours a week, and please don't work more than that because your productivity goes down terribly after you hit 50 hours. But let's say you're going to work 50 hours a week. Do you think it's possible to carve off a half an hour a day to work on strategic issues?
Yeah, I mean, just check your Instagram stats, right?
Right. So if you can carve off a half an hour a day, you will probably double the efficiency and the effectiveness of your business over 1 year. You know, when I used to be, my first 20 years, I owned a vending and food service company. And the thing about the vending and food service company you learn very quickly is that you have route drivers out there who are filling your vending machines.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing 25 or 30 machines a day. Well, if I could find them a way to save 15 to 30 seconds on a process, and think about this for a second, that's a couple of minutes a week. Actually, more than that. It's 15 or 30. Let's say it's 30 seconds, and I'm going to 30 machines. That's 15 minutes a day.
Mm-hmm.
If I can do that every single week, I'm going to be saving this route driver hours and hours and hours of time by making them more efficient. So the thing that you need to do if you're a small business owner is not think about major changes you want to make, but little teeny micro changes that are seconds a day that you're saving is something you do 10, 15, 20 times a day. And part of that is, gee, if I'm doing something that I can pay somebody else $20 an hour to do, or if you know how to use virtual assistants, which I think all small businesses should learn how to do, it's more like $8 to $10 an hour. You're really allowing yourself to find time to work on things that can create $5,000 an hour or more in time for you. But all those things, I mean, all those things are going to be strategic activities and not tactical activities.
Totally. So do you have to like set up this regular schedule, like from 8 to 9, I'm going to do that strategic? How do you?
I'm a big fan of that's called time blocking.
Mm-hmm.
And if you see my calendar, it looks like there's a lot of empty time 2 or 3 days from now. But if you look at my calendar today, you'll see that there is no empty time because I have scheduled all my activities for the day in time blocks. Now, a lot of those activities are tactical things, but it's still on my calendar as an appointment. And then I have the strategic things, which are also on my calendar as an appointment. So I have to consciously skip by this and go on there. I just found this very cool program, which I love. It's called Sensama, which kind of combines time blocking with an efficiency methodology called Scrum with standard old getting things done time management stuff. When you combine those three things together, you can find that you're way, way, way more efficient. There's a guy named Brian Moran that wrote this book, The 12-Week Year. Mm-hmm. And this fits in with using Brian's stuff, getting more done in 12 weeks than most people get done in a year. But the thing is, by time blocking, you're focusing where your time is going and you're choosing how you're spending your time. Activities are not choosing it for you.
So what's the name of this tool that you're excited about?
Sensama, Sunsama. And as you know, Steve, we had this conversation last time we talked. I look for software that will save me a few seconds per activity per day. And I think that trying to find one piece of software to do everything for you is really stupid.
Yeah. Well, my problem is I'll study a software, but all the time I would have saved if I would have signed up for it, I spent evaluating it. There's so many choices out there. And again, I'm in a position where I'm not real confident and I've made mistakes. I've signed up for a software I thought it was going to change the world, and it didn't.
Well, you just said a really major word there. And that word is mistakes. You know, the truth is, if you're going to run a business, you're going to make 90,000 mistakes. Now, my joke is that I'm very, very successful with people who are 50 years old and older running businesses. And the reason why is they've made enough mistakes to figure out what works and what doesn't work. So typically you'll find that people who have been struggling in their business become overnight successes when they turn 50. And it isn't that they became overnight successes. What happened was they made enough mistakes, and they learned enough, and they stayed with it long enough to become effective and efficient at what they were doing. Now, if you're 30 years old and you're making mistakes, well, the question you have to ask yourself is, what did I learn? And you have to make sure you don't beat yourself up or your employees when they make a mistake. When your employees make a mistake, and they do, the question you ask them is, what did we learn? And if they shrug their shoulders, you have to then say, okay, if you did know what you learned, what would that be? And when they shrug their shoulders again, you have to say to them, okay, now here's what I want you to do. I want you to pretend to tell me what you learned. And I've never had anybody can't pretend to come up with something. And the pretend they come up with something is actually what they really learned. And I say, yes, that's the lesson. So how can we make this a permanent learning experience?
That's funny that you're saying that. The mistakes end up being like your MBA, what you had paid to go to school, but actually it's more valuable. It's just a more of a flowing curriculum that's a surprise curriculum instead of an expected curriculum. And to look at it that way helps you maintain somewhat of your sanity.
Well, one of my favorite thinkers is a guy named R. Buckminster Fuller. Yeah. Who was around, he died, before, I don't know, I think he died before the year 2000, but he written several great books. One was Critical Path. And in there, he says two things about mistakes. He says, one, mistakes are learning opportunities. And two, you don't learn less. So those are my two mantras around mistakes.
So tell us a little bit about your system. What are like the top 4 things that you sit down and address with someone when you begin an engagement with an entrepreneur, a business owner that's wanting to get their act together?
Well, it's actually led by the entrepreneurs, not led by me. Mm-hmm. Now, I know pretty much that any issue a business owner is going to come up with falls into 5 broad categories. And the 4 broad categories is, what is my business about, which is values and mission. Mm-hmm. The second is having enough revenue coming into the door, which broadly I put under the theme of recurring revenue. Mm-hmm. The third is becoming operationally irrelevant in your business, which is where you have to learn how to delegate. And that's actually probably the most important thing you can do. The fourth is to systematize your business. And we've been talking about that pretty much right up in that, but that's all strategic stuff. Then finally is, are you filling the 4 buckets of profit, which is lifestyle, having an emergency fund, having a fully funded growth program, and a fully funded retirement program. Now, the way we figure out where we're going to go is we have this process we call the alignment conversation. And the alignment conversation is very simple. Where are you today? Where do you want to be tomorrow? Or some point in the future? What's the gap between those two? What would the value be for you if you were able to fill that gap? And that's a really important question to answer, because you know if the value is high enough to work on it or not. And then finally is, gee, do you want some help with this? So from that, I basically get an idea of what's important to you, because the truth is you're the expert about what you want in your life. My job is to help you understand what you want and then develop strategies that get that. And those strategies in creating what I call a sale-ready business will generally fall under one of those 5 things, and usually all of those 5 things, but we have to go in the right order at it. Now, my buddy Mike McCallowitz just wrote this great new book called Fix This Next. Mm-hmm. And he sort of combines this thing with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which he rejiggered around that, to helping you figure out what's the next thing you want to focus on. And Mike is, in this book, talks about a thing called the theory of constraints. And I call the theory of constraints whack-a-mole for business. Because what you do is you look for a bottleneck to occur, you fix the bottleneck, and you move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
So Mike's little thing with his little graphic with his hierarchy of needs helps you figure out what that bottleneck is you need to go after next. Now, in your business, you use a methodology called Scrum, which is project management, which is how can we increase the velocity of doing similar projects all the time? Because you do the same sort of project for your clients over and over and over again. And by systematizing what you're doing and going back and doing a retrospective of what worked and what didn't work, you're going to increase the speed of what you're doing so dramatically that it gives people who do Scrum well an unfair advantage. You know, for example, I love, this is one of my favorite things. I get a contractor on the phone with me, you know, from the construction business.
Yeah.
And one of my first questions would be, I said, what would it be worth to you if I could increase your profit and your productivity by 30% in 6 months? And they go, well, you can't do that. I said, well, no, that wasn't my question. My question was, what would it be worth to you if you could do it?
Right.
And then you do that. And then I explained how Scrum works. And I said, you know something? That will give you an unfair advantage because it's used by every software development company now, but it's used by no construction companies. And it's the same methodology that they have that you need, which is project management.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get good at that, which is what, systematizing your business, you are going to have an unfair advantage over your competitors. And if you ever want to leave your business, sell what you're doing, you've now given another construction company a good reason to buy you because they don't know how to do that. And it's worth a lot to them to learn it.
Exactly. So you and I were talking about one of the epiphanies that I had was that, and I got it from a book. It wasn't my idea, but a business goes through life stages, just like a person does. You've got that startup stage. It's really messy. Then you kind of start to get some traction and some buy-in from employees. And there's a certain stage in that business life cycle where you would be a perfect fit. And it'd be nice to start from the start with all your ducks in a row, but you don't know everything at that time. What stage is the best time to start to bring you into an organization?
When you've been doing your business for 20 years.
Wow.
And you've had a lot of mistakes and you realize you're stuck. You're at a stage, you've been at a stage for 5, 7, 8 years. And when someone says, when are you going to do this? You keep saying 5 years from now. I've dubbed that perma 5. You know, like I will go to someone and they'll say, when I go talk to someone who's 55 years old, when are you going to sell your business? 5 years from now. I go back 2 years later, 5 years from now. I go back 3 years later, 5 years from now. They know there's something wrong, that they can't get their business sold or can't get enough money for the business or whatever it is. But they think that whatever it is going to magically appear and reveal itself over the next 5 years. Are going to fix it, but they haven't been asking the right questions. So I've dubbed that perma 5. And most business owners in the country live in perma 5. Everything's 5 years away. I just finished writing my second book, and in there I was being kind of a brat, and we were talking, in the second book is about a business family transition, same characters as my first book, and I wrote that it's going to happen in 4.5 years, because I hate hearing the term 5 years, because I know it's a myth.
So when you say sales ready business,
right?
What does that mean exactly? We can.
My definition is very simple. It's a business that somebody else wants to own.
Mm-hmm. So what are those things that we need to consider when we're starting to think about it? That's a mindset. That's a shift from I'm just trying to stay alive and make it through for 5 more years to what do I need to do to prep to sell this thing?
Yeah, that's a really kind of interesting question. In that, again, we go back to those 5 things I talked about. If you have those 5 things at somewhere around 8 to 10 on a scale of 10, you have a business that people are going to dying to want to buy, and you're going to be dying not to sell it because you're having too much fun and making too much money. And I've done this several times with people where we talk about, someone walks in my office and say, I want to sell my business. And I say, when? They say, yesterday. I know right now I'm working with burnout. Before we've even gone to any place else, I know I've got a burnout issue. And the
Wow.
reason I have a burnout issue is they're working 100% tactically and zero strategically. And if
Yes.
I help you do the 5 things of sustainability with your business, you are going to be working 90% strategically and 10% tactically. And you're going to start making a ton of money and having a ton of fun. And, we start with values. And I tell people, I say, look, a buyer doesn't give 2 cents about your values. But if you're not values led, you're never going to create a great company somebody else wants to own. And by the
Wow.
way, when you're values led, it's a great company that you're so happy to own, you never want to leave.
Yeah. So there's this book I read called Vivid Vision.
Yep.
And by Cameron Harold. I really like that book. So I sat and did that exercise for my agency. And I took maybe 3 or 4 months to really decide the questions I want to answer. And in that book, simplistically, you draw a picture of what your company looks like 3 years from now.
Yes.
So you pick the questions you want to answer, then you answer those, but you answer them in the future. I'm telling you that it made my employees, let's assume you have employees that are engaged and want to do their best. The
By
truth
the
is,
way, that's all employees. If your employees are not doing their best and not engaged, it's your fault. It's not their fault.
totally, but let's assume that they exist without this vision. They're rowing to some point on the horizon. And even if they think they're going where you want to go, that's not the case. And unless you say this is where we're going and this is why and this is who, they can't row to the same place as you.
Yeah, I've been helping people write job descriptions and job ads for years. And in my own company, about 3 years ago, our longtime assistant left. So I had to hire a new assistant. So I'm going to try something just as an experiment. I wrote 1 paragraph about the job and 5 paragraphs about our values. This was well before the coronavirus. This was back when Burlington, Vermont had a 3% unemployment rate. Nobody could hire anybody. I had 120 applications come in. And it was because we were writing about our values and what was important, so people could decide whether you were the right company to work for based on what you're about and not the stupid job description.
Mm-hmm.
I tell people for years, I said, look, simplify what you're doing. Stop making it complicated. This is especially hard for MBAs because they're smart people, and smart people like complicated solutions because it makes them feel smarter. The smartest people I know want dumb solutions so everybody can implement. So instead of writing this long job description that has this laundry list of what you want people to do, I want you to think about the job in a different way. I want you to think about the 3 to 5 things that person has to do to be successful in that job and call those success factors. And when you're putting together your job description and your job posting, it's the success factors you talk about, not the stuff you need to be able to do.
Right.
And if you do that, you're going to get better people. And if you have a methodology for hiring, which we also have a framework for that, you're going to be able to hire about 80%, 85% correctly instead of your usual 35 or 40% correctly.
Yeah, I love that. I must confess, I don't read resumes. I want to get to know them. I think the perfect job interview is like, hey, Josh, I appreciate you applying for the position. Usually I'm going to sit here and ask you a bunch of questions and you're going to try to tell me the answers I want to hear. But why don't we just flip this? You just ask me questions for an hour and then we'll figure out what's the next step after that. I think that would be the most, because you're going to get all sorts of ideas from them on the way they think, what they're interested in. And if the first question that they start with is, well, tell me about your benefits. Well, we're already going down 2 different paths right there, right? And I think it would be a great way to kind of enlighten. One of the things that I think most people looking for a position don't realize is it's incumbent upon them to figure out what they're best at and where they fit. I can't read. I can't read you. And right now it's my job to go, all right, Josh, I'm just from a few conversations, we're going to put you up front here and you're going to answer the phones. I think that's where you would be the best. You and I know that the chances are that that's not where you're best. But how do I figure that out, right? And without some experience with you.
Yeah, I mean that it's an interesting idea, and I think I'd like to try it out. I'm pretty much of that. We're hiring for a role,
Mm-hmm.
and the role is not your technical skills. The
Right.
technical skills can be taught. Now, if I need to get a C++ programmer, they need to know how to program a C++.
Right.
That's just, that's the entry to the conversation. If you can't do that, I'm not even going to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can do that, I'm going to ignore all those technical things you can do. And I'm going to be talking to you, I'm going to be asking you open-ended questions about values. For example, my core value, number one core value is personal responsibility. I want to hear your story about your last job when something didn't go well. So I'm going to ask you to tell me a story. I like people telling me stories.
Yeah.
So I say, tell me a story about blah. And in there, I'm going to be picking out whether they're going to uphold the values that I think are important or not. I will not hire anybody for any of my companies unless they score an 8 out of 10 or above on the 5 values which we think are dear. And it's just, one of those things that's where I start. And then I go and I start talking about, are they willing to do the activities in the business that will make them successful in the role that I'm hiring for? So, for example, if I'm hiring a salesperson, are they willing to get out of the office and go talk to people?
Oh, they're going to tell you yes. Yes, I love it. I
Yeah,
love it.
but I don't ask them that question.
Mm-hmm.
I ask other questions that allow me to see if they're willing to do that. So in other words, I might ask them, gee, are you an introvert or an extrovert? And what about that makes you interested in other people?
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask questions that are basically going to give me reveals or tells about whether they're going to do that. If of course, I say, are you willing to go out and do cold calling? Or are you willing to go out and do 5 presentations a week or 2 presentations a week? They're of course going to say yes. I might say, what's a reasonable way for you to spend your time? And they're going to tell me what they need to do. And I'm going to say, well, how do I know you're going to do that? And they will tell me from past experience to prove to me that they've done it, or they're going to go, blah, 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 and I know they're giving me a bunch of line of crap.
Right.
So it's really about learning how to, interviewing is not asking a closed-ended question ever. All your questions need to be open-ended and let people tell you stories and ask them and tell them that and use that language. Tell me a story. Because when you're telling me a story, they can suspend judgment and they'll tell you what they're really thinking.
Yeah. So revenue. So we've spent some time on values and missions, and so which one of these other 4 parts are your favorite? Which one do you really like to spend time on? You think that's the biggest lever you address first?
How to delegate, becoming operationally irrelevant for your business. If you can't make time to work on this stuff, you're never going to work on it.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone has tried to delegate. Almost everybody has been a total failure at it the first time. In fact, I would say 100% people that value the first time, and almost everybody quits after that first time because it didn't work.
Right.
So that's why businesses stay at 5, 10 employees, is that the owner feels that they have to have everything under their thumb and they only can handle so much before they have to say, I can't do anymore.
Right.
If you can learn to delegate, you can grow a big business. And there are two levels of delegation. First level is, can I delegate directly to somebody doing the job? And that's more or less building helpers than as delegators when you first do that, by the way. And then the second role is, as you get up to 25 people, you start managing managers. In that point, you say, can I delegate in a way that gets us the result we want to get? Which means you're being a coach and supervisor to the direct report, and you're coaching them on how to become delegators to their direct reports who actually are doing the work. And if you can't do that, you can't grow a business. It's that simple. It is the most important thing you can do to create value in a business, because a buyer doesn't want you. They want your cash flow. They want your people. They want your systems. They want your customers, not you. They'll tell you they want you. They don't want you. And the more that you get yourself out of the way, the more your people are able to shine, as long as they have systems to work in, which give them guardrails to say, here is appropriate performance. You know, back when Nordstrom's was the greatest retail store of all times, they're unfortunately not that way anymore. They just gave their employees guardrails and said, do what's right. And I mean, I used to go to Nordstrom's and buy, you know, $2,000, $2,500 worth of clothes at a crack back when I wore suits.
Right.
And that was, you know, back 30 years ago. And I was always amazed at how great they were at solving all sorts of problems that wouldn't normally come up. I remember once that they, you know, I had bought a bunch of clothes and they said, well, go in the bar and have a drink. And then he came in and said, gee, I'm really sorry. I can't buy you alcohol, but can I buy you dinner? And I said, because they needed about a half an hour to get all my crap ready that I bought.
Right.
And it was a great thing. Now, you go to Nordstrom's today, that's not going to happen, because I don't know what they did as far as their service goes, but my guess is they put a bunch of arbitrary rules in place that used to not be there. And the truth is, your people need systems so they know what excellence is. Your customers need systems so they know what to expect from your business.
Totally. That's one of the big things there, is how to communicate proper expectations for both sides.
Yes.
You think that it would be clear, but it's not. And I've really fallen short on that a couple of times, and it was really a struggle. But once we kind of got to the point where here, actually, let's make sure we're talking about the same thing, then that's when it started to be fulfilling and fun.
Well, that's why you need clarifying statements around your values. For example, one of my values is rights and respect. And said in my clarifying statement is, I will respect you as a person and who you are, and I expect the same from you. Mm-hmm. Now, you have an idea what I mean by rights and respect. If I didn't have that clarifying statement, you would make up your own meaning for what I'm talking about, and there's about a 99% chance that your meaning would be different than my meaning. You know, one of my favorite things, I stole this game from Tony Robbins. He used to call it the picnic game. But, you know, you have people in groups of 8 or 10 around the table, and you pick a word. It doesn't matter what the word is, but you always pick a word that everybody in that particular industry, that room, has a total belief they know what it means. So, for example, I used to go, when I used to do things for the vending industry, I would say vending, right? The first 10 words that come into your mind about the word vending, what it means. And then I would have those groups of 8 or 10 people compare the list to see how many all 8 or 10 would be the same. The most I ever had the same was 2. It usually was 0 or 1.
Really?
Yes. So we think we know what a word means. We don't have a clue about what other people think the word means. So you need to be asking them what their definition is, or telling them what your definition is. And then after you tell somebody, you have to ask them to make sure they understood what you said by having them feed it back to you. Because a lot of times I can say something and what you're hearing isn't even close to what's coming out of my mouth.
So true. So your book, Sustainable.
Yes, there it is.
Why did you, what What was the inciting incident that kicked you off to write that book?
This is going to sound, I know I've been wanting to write a book for years. And I had a guy come to me who was a ghostwriter, you dictate, we published, and I was trading him, working with him for where he did. And he never took any of my advice and everything fell apart and I never got anything done. So I said, okay, I'm going to finish this book. And I hired a friend of mine who's a great writing coach. In fact, she's doing the content editing for my book I just finished. And I said, Ann, I want to write this book. Will you help me finish it? We ended up going back and having to rewrite the whole book. Now, I wrote this as a business parable. And the reason I wrote it as a business parable is, one, I really like the hero's journey. I think the hero's journey is a great way to write a book. And a really easy way to do a hero's journey in a way that's approachable for business owners is to make it into a story. Now, a lot of people write books. Now, your book is great in that you have a really good story arc that goes through the book. And it's not these little vignettes that mostly don't work. Most people use these little vignettes within a how-to book don't work. But when you're writing a parable, which is a story that goes from here to here, you have to have an arc that goes with that.
Yes.
And what she taught me about, which was really valuable, and now I've been doing stuff with Don Miller, which is how I found you, is that you have to have a hero who has a problem and comes across a guide who can help them go through the issues they're having. And a business parable is perfect for that, because you tell this story, and maybe not everything in the story is going to be applicable to you, but there's enough in there where you recognize, gee, this is me. Right. And because it's not telling you what you're terrible, you get to say, I might want to try that.
Yes.
So, I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni, and a big fan of Steve Farber, and both those folks have cut their teeth on writing business parables. And then I have my friend Chris Brogan, who absolutely hates business parables, and as a result, won't write me a blurb. I love Chris, but it's just one of those funny things.
What's the name of your new book? What is it about?
It's probably going to be called The Sale Ready Business.
Okay.
And we haven't come up with the subtitle yet. But essentially, it's about, the new book is going to be, we're picking up 6 years later from where the first book ends. And our hero, John Aardvark, wants to leave the business. He doesn't really want to leave the business. He knows he should leave the business. And he's got 2 children, one who is totally a pain in the neck, what I call a brilliant jerk, and a daughter who has an MBA and has been sort of being un-MBA for the last 6 years and is going to be the heir apparent. We talk about all the issues that happen along the way, what they need to do to get ready to do that, and what are the plans they're going to have to put in place so John and his wife, Ann, feel comfortable selling the business to their child, finding a home for Adam, who's his son, and having enough money for retirement, and John being able to figure out what's next in his life, which is a big challenge when it comes to having a business that's ready for sale. So the thing that we work on is we need to have this business be sale ready. So in case we don't do what we need to do, for whatever reason, do an internal transaction, we'll have a third party, which is an outsider, wanting to come in and pay John a boatload of cash for his business. Right. So we talk about all the things we need to do and we talk about the concept of enough versus most, which is most business owners do not want the most they get for the business. They want enough to fill their financial needs, but there are lots of non-financial needs that happen along the way that also have to be addressed. So that's what the new book is about.
One of the things that I was shocked to realize, and I don't know why I didn't realize it, but so many businesses are family-run businesses, and you do have that transition challenge. You would think that the parents or the people that started it would want to set the next generation up for success, but that's not obvious, and that's not, you've got so many other family dynamics in play. That seems like a lot of obstacles to get over.
There are, and the truth is, I would say maybe 5 to 15% of businesses ever get sold. The rest are just closed down. And basically, most businesses are not saleable because it's all based on the owner. It's based on what the owner does. Most businesses are solopreneurs. And there's nothing inherently wrong with not building a sale-ready business. You have to use other strategies, and we call that the Financial Freedom Project, which is if you're not building a business that's going to be sale-ready, then you need to have a strategy to become financially free from your business, or you can never stop working. And frankly, a lot of people in these small businesses, they really don't want to stop working. But at some point when you're 75 or 80 years old, you are going to stop working.
Right.
So do you have the resources to be comfortable for the rest of your life after that? And you don't need to have a business that's sellable to do that. You just need to run a different strategy, which we call pre-funding a retirement. And that's where the Financial Freedom Project rolls in.
So if someone was going to start a business today, would you recommend to approach it from the perspective, all right, you're going to start this business, but let's start building it to where you can sell it at some point in the future? And just by adopting that mindset, would it help you avoid a lot of mistakes along the way of building a business?
Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it's first of all, it's not a realistic expectation. That's not why people start businesses.
I know.
There are very, very, I mean, there are people who do this. There are people who start businesses with the sole intention of building it to sell it. I've met them. They exist. Mm-hmm. It is a small percentage of people start businesses. Most people start businesses saying, gee, I'm a pretty good carpenter. I'm working for this guy as a jerk. I can go off and do my own carpentry thing and do a much better job for our clients, our customers, and I don't need to be around the jerk anymore. So that's how most businesses get started. They're not started with the thought of doing that. And if I was to go and talk to you when you're first starting that new construction company or a new vending company or new marketing company, yeah, I'm talking, you're just going to go right over your head. Your eyes are going to glaze over and you're going to say, not for me, go away.
Yeah.
You really need to be at a level where you've gotten to 5 or 10 employees and you realize, gee, if I could get to 30 employees or 40 employees, I'd have something to be really different here. And now you're stuck. Now you need to have some help along the way. And, one of the things that we're doing is we're building 3 levels of help for people. One is the online course, mm-hmm. which we're in the process of finishing up right now for the Sale Ready business. The second thing is a mastermind where you have a group of like-minded people saying, we want to work on making our business sale ready. That's more expensive. And then there's the most expensive, which is the one-on-one coaching.
Right.
Where you say, okay, I want you to work with me on my business on an all-you-can-eat basis about what we need to do to get the business to be sale ready. And I want you to be holding me accountable to do that. Now, the online course has no accountability or very little accountability. The mastermind has basically pure accountability. Mm-hmm. And then the one-on-one has real total accountability where you've hired yourself a thinking partner, not a coach, not a mentor. So by doing that, I think we're going to be putting ourselves in a position that, hey, if I'm that 30-year-old person with 10 people and I can't afford $5,000 a month, well, I can probably afford $500 to do an online course.
Right.
And maybe I can afford $900 a month to do a mastermind. And then if I get to a point where I'm making some real money and I'm saying, gee, I'm making $500,000 and with some work I can make to $1 million a year, then it's worth spending me $60,000 a year. I mean, if you have somebody coming to work for you and you say, gee, I can help you get to $1 million in profit and you're going to pay me $60,000 a year to do that. Deal. To me, that seems like a pretty easy decision.
Right. Yeah. Where do I sign?
Right. Well, that's the whole thing is, it really comes down to is you have to be making a certain amount of money no matter what happens to hire a certain level of advice. And everybody can afford $500. Everybody can afford $500. Not everybody can afford $12,000.
True.
You probably need to be making $150,000, $100,000 a year before you're willing to invest $12,000 to see if that $12,000 can become $25,000 or $30,000. And by the way, It's not sales we want you to focus on. It's cash flow and profits. Sales is a waste of time. If you're focusing on sales, and Mike McCall always talks about this a lot now, if you're focusing on your sales, you're really just wasting your time, because building sales does not build cash. It just builds sales. Now, if you build sales strategically, it can build cash. And I learned this the hard way with my father, is that back when I was my first years of the vending business, the worst thing that happened to me that could have ever happened to me. And that was, I was really, really successful for my first couple of years. We were blowing the doors off, bringing new clients on and building profit. And he kept saying to me, it's not about sales, you idiot, it's about profits. If you don't have profits, sales don't matter. And then, of course, I kept building sales, but didn't realize that building sales costs cash. And I hit the wall. And I learned a really, really hard lesson that, yes, cash flow is king. Profits are nice, but it's all about cash flow. Sales don't mean a darn thing. It's all about cash flow. Sales are only there because without sales, you can't have cash flow. So the first thing you need to focus on in business is bringing business in the door. But once you get some predictability around that, your focus needs to go to, how do those sales coming in the door get converted to free cash flow? So that's the question you need to be asking. Most business owners never ask themselves that.
Yeah.
And the reason is, if you read the business press, you would think that every company in Silicon Valley just focuses on sales growth and life is wonderful because they're just focusing on sales and that's what you should do. Well, the truth is, the VCs have a dirty little secret in Silicon Valley, is that very, 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 very few of their portfolio companies ever become Facebook or Google or Uber, whatever it is they have, where that strategy actually does work. But what mostly happens is these businesses never get the profitability, and the VCs are able to force the owners to sell these companies to the FANGs, to Salesforce, Facebook, Oracle, Google, Apple, whoever's going to buy it, because these guys are out there buying talent, and they pay a couple of $1 million per engineer to get the talent, and the VCs get their 30% return, and the people who started the business get to go to work and make a bunch of money and probably start the whole process over again. And that's the game they play out there, but that doesn't work on Main Street.
No, it doesn't. So we're coming up to the end of this excellent conversation. We're going to have a couple of more, but tell us a little bit about your podcast right quick, and then how folks can reach out to you and have a discussion.
Well, my podcast is called Cracking the Cash Flow Code, and it used to be called the Sustainable Business. And it was called Sustainable Business because I was talking about economic sustainability, and everyone kept thinking I was environmental sustainability. So I said, okay, let's change the name. And we're probably going to change the name again to be the Sale Ready Business. We're talking about what it takes to create a sale ready business, and more importantly, what you can do to have a lot more fun and make a lot more money in your business. So I bring people on who are either experts in their subject area or people like you who own private businesses. And we talk about the bottlenecks in your business, what you did to get past them, and what kind of advice you can bring to other business owners so they don't repeat what you repeated. You don't need to make the same mistakes I made. You can make all new ones all yourself.
Yeah, I've got some doozies myself as well. So what's your website address?
We have two websites. One is www.sustainablebusiness.co. And if you go to that website and go /sale ready, you get my free ebook on how to leave your business in style, the 8 steps you need to go to leave your business. And our other website is www.stage2planning.com. That's our wealth management site where I've been writing a blog for about 10 years. And I think I have over 1,000 blog entries there or something like that. It's also where our knowledge center is and all our ebooks live. So both are there. Reaching me is really easy. It's jpatrick@stage2planning.com with the number 2. And I do read all my emails. I'm email obsessed and usually get back within an hour or so, unless I'm on a bike ride.
Bike riding. So one thing I always want to talk about, but we didn't, but let's do this. So you have like top 20 business books that you recommend every year. Do you have like a little PDF? If someone was to email you, would you send them that list?
What I would do is I would dig up my blog post from last year where I wrote about it, because I haven't made a PDF of it, but I probably should.
Yeah, you ought to.
If you look in the back of my book, Sustainable, I think there's like 80 or 100 books I've got in there, which I recommend as recommended reading.
Oh, I love that. That's excellent. You need to put links to all of these on a page on your website as well, where folks can go and click on them.
You're absolutely correct, and I will do that.
Hey, Josh, this has been an excellent conversation. This is stuff that I like to do. You know, we all run businesses and we all make mistakes, and we don't have a lot of folks to like powwow with, but listen in on two guys over 50 that have been plodding through this this gauntlet. It's kind of fun to realize you're not alone. You're not crazy.
And by the way, I'm way over 50. I mean, I'm closer to 70 than I am to 62. How's that?
But he's on a bike, folks. He likes to ride his bike, and that's cool. So up in the beautiful state of Vermont?
That's where I am.
So if you're going to travel to Vermont, I bet Josh would have a suggested bike route that you should follow.
Several.
All right. Thanks, Josh, for being on the ROI Online Podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Steve, for having me.
All right. That's a wrap.